I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 310 of the Brilliant Balance podcast, How to Deal with Those Superwoman Expectations. Today, my friends, I want to delve into a societal myth that I think really is a top contributor to the guilt that women feel when we can't do it all. And I want to shed a little more light on what I think is an incredibly important need, both for societal change, but also for our own self-compassion. And here's why. I am willing to bet that at some point in your life, maybe even some point this week, you've heard this phrase, I don't know how you do it. I mean, you're like Superwoman. And I bet that when you heard that for the first time, there was sort of a flush of pride. I know there was for me. You know, when you first hear that, the very first time, you're like, yeah, I am. Look at me doing all these things. But then that narrative lands like this weight of expectations. You know, that Superwoman cape is heavy. And we are in a real conundrum because of this myth, the myth of the woman who can literally do it all. So I want to unpack a little bit what this means. What are the factors of the Superwoman myth? Sometimes we call this the Supermom myth. I actually think it applies in both instances, and I've heard it in both ways. There are a few characteristics of the Superwoman, and I want to talk about what they are. And then I want to get into, in this episode, what are the implications of our buying into this myth? And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we can maybe do about it. Right? There is no one coming to rescue us, especially not if we're supposed to be Superwoman. So I think we're going to have to dig ourselves out of the mess that this myth has created. Here's what I've got first. First up, I want to talk about what is in this myth, kind of what is the narrative of the Superwoman. First of all, she has perfection in every role. This is really at the core of this myth, is that this woman must excel in every aspect of her life simultaneously, right? Expected to be exceptional in careers and dedicated mothers or wives or partners, right? We're maintaining perfectly tidy homes and managing all the domestic responsibilities. We're taking great care of ourselves. So this perfection in every single role that we're taking on. I'm not even mentioning things like being great daughters, being great sisters, being great friends. There is no place to lower the standard, even a teensy bit, across our roles when we're going to subscribe to the Superwoman myth. This woman has unlimited energy and time, right? She's portrayed as having all the time and energy that she needs to fulfill these manifold responsibilities without experiencing burnout or fatigue. The third thing I thought about was sort of unwavering emotional strength, right? The Superwoman is never upset. She is emotionally strong. She never shows vulnerability. She never cries. She's never angry. There's kind of this sense of staying strong and stable. She's physically perfect, right? There's this physical perfection, this attractive and youthful look, despite the stresses and the demands of their lives, that they have time to go to the gym and eat well and find a beautiful wardrobe and have their hair and nails done, like this physical specimen of perfection. And the fifth one that I think is really important and not always talked about is that Superwoman does not need support. The myth often downplays or honestly completely disregards the importance of support systems, the village, whether that's our partners or our families or resources within the community. It really suggests that each one of us as an individual should be able to handle everything independently. You know, that leaping tall buildings in a single bound. There's this very kind of lone wolf narrative that's at the core of Superwoman. And it is a recipe for disaster. We keep just adding and adding and adding to our plate of expectations without ever relaxing a single standard to something that is reasonable. And honestly, it's making us feel like we're going crazy because we don't know how to walk away from that mythology. It was like handed to us as though it was a birthright. And now we're stuck with it. And the implications of buying into this myth are really, they're far reaching. I'm going to talk about several of them in this episode. I stopped at 10. Okay. So buckle up here for a minute. I stopped at 10. I mean, I could have gone on to even more. I'm sure I could have thought of even more, but this was 10 really intense negative implications of adopting this Superwoman myth. So if you listened to me just describe what it is, right? Those 5 elements of what makes a Superwoman: perfection in every role, unlimited energy and time available, unwavering emotional strength, physical perfection, and no need for support. And you were like, uh-oh, that sounds like me. That sounds like what I am expecting of myself or what the people around me are expecting of me. I want you to come face to face with the implications of buying into that myth. Because sometimes we don't even see these. If we're so in deep with buying into that narrative, these things are coming along as like a side dish and we might not even realize why. So the first side effect, right? The first negative implication of adopting this myth is our mental health. Any of us who feel pressured to conform to this ideal are going to experience extraordinarily high levels of stress, anxiety, sometimes depression. You know, it's this constant striving for perfection and the fear that comes with, like, what if I fall short? What if I can't reach that expectation? And that leads to those feelings of inadequacy or imposter syndrome, we sometimes call it, or burnout. I am hearing about burnout so much these days, right? Or just emotional exhaustion. Like, our mental health suffers when we don't have the time and space protected in our lives to, one, confront these expectations head on and really look at how did we get here in the first place. Like, if we just think there's something wrong with us, then we take on the burden of how we feel as though it's our fault. That has a pretty immediate negative impact on our mental health. And if we can't get recovery time for our brain to not be thinking about all of these expectations, our mental health is going to suffer, right? That's the first one, mental health. Second implication is physical health. So pursuing perfection across all of our roles can make us neglect our physical health. I hear this every day. Women are sacrificing sleep for sure. Like, full stop. We are sacrificing sleep. We're definitely sacrificing the time that we could dedicate to moving our bodies in whatever way feels good to us. Anything from, I'm going to do some simple stretching, on a yoga mat in the morning, to I'm going to compete in triathlons. Anywhere along that spectrum that feels good to us, we're like downshifting from our baseline. We're making sacrifices in the food that we feed ourselves. Like, I don't have time to shop for or make food that's good for me, so I am just grabbing whatever is within arm's reach. I hear that every day, right? And just those 3 things, sleep, movement, and food, if we just stopped there, that leads to significant health problems, right? And kind of this like general malaise, like a decreased overall sense of well-being. So mental health and physical health are the top 2. Here's one you might not have thought about that is, I think, kind of being left by the wayside are our career aspirations. Now, you could argue, well, yeah, Superwoman's supposed to have a, kick-ass career. Maybe. But I also think that women are stepping back from pursuing their career aspirations to their fullest potential because they're so worried about the sacrifices that they may have to make in their personal life to do it. It's like, I don't think I can keep up this veneer of perfection if I try to play bigger. So I'm going to hang back here where I'm overqualified, for the role that I know I can nail it. I could do it with my eyes closed. And because of that, they're settling for less challenging roles, right? Than they might otherwise be able to really be challenged by and, interested in and energized by. So I think our career aspirations are actually tamping down because of this myth. Another way that I see this myth negatively affecting us is our relationships. Y'all, our relationships are strained. I mean, balancing those demands of work life and family life and self-care. Like, I really think of it as the triad. When we're overwhelmed by that juggling act, by trying to do those things well, we're so mad at anyone who is not seemingly supporting us sufficiently, right? So that is usually public enemy number one is our partner. We're like, you, my friend, are not doing enough. Or I don't have any time for you. I am so busy doing all this other stuff. You are like 10th on the totem pole. And because of that, whether it's because they're not actively involved or as involved as we want them to be in household tasks or childcare, or whether it's this other dynamic of, I just do not have time to engage with you, our relationships are suffering. And I'm talking specifically here about our romantic relationships. I think all of our relationships are suffering. Our relationships as family members, as daughters, as sisters, our relationships as friends are also suffering when we are more focused on performance than we are on connection. And Superwoman is a performer, right? She's not a connector. Hi, it's Cheryl Ann. Thanks for listening. Did you know that the ideas I share on this show are things I also can help you implement? If you want me in your corner helping you find more time for what fills you up, go to brilliant-balance.com/schedule and sign up for a free exploratory call. Give yourself this time. You'll be so glad you did. The fifth one that I see is kind of related back to mental health, but it's our self-esteem or our self-worth, because the Superwoman myth comes with a lot of comparison. We're constantly comparing ourselves to others. And so if we feel like we don't measure up in that kind of quick comparison check that we're doing across any vector, how we look, what our houses are like, how our kids are behaving, what our relationships are like, our jobs, if we're losing in that comparison game by our own evaluation, then we can fall into this negative belief spiral. So our self-esteem and our self-worth tank. Now, I also think that this supermom, superwoman myth is affecting societal expectations. Like, it has an outward impact in that it reinforces traditional gender roles and stereotypes, which perpetuates the idea, right? So whenever society reinforces, oh my gosh, I don't know how you're doing it all, right? And we take pride in that, we get another loop, there's another turn of the dial. And so we're actually hurting our progress toward things like gender equality in the workplace or, equal sharing of domestic responsibilities. So we're like, the idea of this myth is in the way, and it's having a negative effect, a negative loop on societal expectations. It's also having a negative effect on time management, our relationship with time, maybe not time management as much as our relationship with time. Because when we're trying to meet the unrealistic expectations of the myth, we're just stretched really, really thin. And then we take the blame. We're like, you know what? It's a prioritization problem. I just really stink at time management. I don't know. I mean, maybe we're just trying to cram too much in and we're fighting an unrealistic standard, but then we're taking that on as it's really our fault. That's what we're thinking about. The stress and burnout levels that come from the constant pressure to excel in all areas of life have a long-term effect. So you can have a short-term mental health burden, right? And you can rebound from it if you have a level of resilience. But when that continues over time, we end up in chronic stress, which leads to burnout. And that chronic stress is exacerbated by this mythology. We can't ever set it down. You can have a great week where you're like, look at me rocking all the things, but we need some recovery. If we're not getting that recovery, we're on this one-way path to chronic stress and burnout. And the inequality in our household responsibilities is just exacerbated by this myth. Again, when we take pride in being a superwoman, and or when our partners or the people around us are reinforcing that that's how they see us, then they don't step in and we don't invite them in to household responsibilities. So we're handling everything on our own, regardless of our partner's capability or their willingness to contribute. I know there are times where my husband's like, I'll do that. And I'm like, no, thank you. I got it. Right. So that kind of the pride of donning that cape and being like, I will handle all the things. It backfires, but it like we're perpetuating the inequality in responsibilities because of this mythology. And finally, the last one I look at, and maybe this is where it really like punches us in the gut, is it's impacting our children. When we buy into this myth, we are perpetuating the myth across generations. It's influencing the expectations placed on our daughters and our sons. It's reinforcing potentially traditional gender roles, right? So somewhere a generation is going to need to be the myth busters, right? We're going to have to break through this mythology. And I think that is us. I think it is this generation that has to reset these expectations and really kind of out the myth for what it is. So that is a pretty grim picture. As if you're listening here and you're like, oh, now my head is hanging a little lower. It feels even heavier. Like that's a lot of negative effects from something that was probably designed to make us feel good and to celebrate how many things we were able to do. So what do we do, right? If we're going to break through this myth and reset the narrative that we're comfortable with to one that is more realistic for us, right? Instead of just throwing our hands up in frustration or worse, succumbing to the demands of being superwomen, I think there's a few things that we really can do. And I'm going to break them into 3 big buckets. The first is about setting more realistic expectations. Okay. If we determine that this collection of responsibilities is actually not realistic, if we can look at it objectively and say it is objectively unrealistic for one human to do all of these things at this level all of the time, then we can set more realistic expectations, ones that prioritize our own care, our health care, our self-care, the things we're interested in, the things that are rejuvenating and restorative to us. We can establish stronger boundaries that honor realistic expectations. Like this is the learning how to say no, learning how to communicate what we need to our partners and our employers and our families so that they can start to respect those boundaries. We can really reevaluate what is a priority for us. We can give ourselves permission to prioritize the things that are important to us. Looking at our personal goals, our professional goals, we can readjust them based on our current circumstances and what's manageable for us, like at any given time. So just setting more realistic expectations that prioritize us as a human, that establish boundaries, and that really reevaluate what are our highest priorities. That's going to go a long way. Okay, the second thing we can do is we can find some support and really build a community around us that will walk beside us as we're navigating these changes. If we're not connected to other women who understand the challenges of the Superwoman myth, so we can share experiences and advice and support, then we're on an island. So we want to create that support system if we don't have it, and then lean into it so that we actually can raise our hand and spread the responsibilities around, right? Also, we can get professional support. So we have community support and we can build a personal support system, but we may need some professional support. We may need to be working with the people in our workplace in addition to the people at home to redistribute some of these expectations. And then the third piece is where we take that out another layer and really collectively challenge the societal norms and our individual beliefs. Like we can educate ourselves, just like you did by listening to this episode, about what some of the really negative effects of this Superwoman myth are. And then we can start practicing self-compassion, right? Recognizing like, hey, it's okay that I didn't get that particular aspect of my life to perfection. That's actually really normal. We can be really compassionate with ourselves when everything isn't perfect all the time. And then we can go advocate for change, right? We can hear where this myth is popping up in conversations and we can challenge it. We can start conversations with our kids so that they can challenge like their observation. We can bring their awareness to where this myth is really playing out so that they can see it. We can bring it up in our workplaces where we're seeing this myth perpetuated. Because until we challenge this narrative by really seeing it for what it is, right? It's not a compliment. It's actually like it's a set of shackles. And if we can challenge it by seeing it for what it is and rewriting the script into one that really better suits us, until we do that, we're sort of beholden to living lives as superwomen. And I don't think that's what we really set out to be. I think we set out to have choices and the ability to exercise those choices in the way that felt right to us, not to just keep accepting every single responsibility and expectation that someone doled out to us. So, if you made it to the end of this episode and you're sitting here thinking, okay, this is my world. My world is I have adopted the, kind of rules of the superwoman. I am trying to exhibit perfection in every role. I'm acting as though I have unlimited energy and time. I am expecting unwavering emotional strength of myself. I am expecting physical perfection. And I am acting like I do not require any support. I hope that today's episode helps you gently challenge that. And I want to acknowledge that I understand that it can be candidly scary to think about laying down even relaxing one standard that you have been holding yourself to. I know that it is for me. I absolutely have been on a long path of trying to kind of keep this model in front of me so that I can really evaluate day in and day out choices against it and ask myself, am I making this choice because it's what Superwoman would do? Or am I making this choice because it's what I would do? Because it's what feels right to me. It feels possible for me. It feels like something that would be fulfilling or enriching to me and to the people around me. And that is a far better yardstick to use, is our own, the one that tells us what is realistic for us, instead of the one that society is telling us is realistic for a mythical creature. That is all that I have for you today, my friends. If you are new to the Brilliant Balance podcast, I hope that you will stick around and subscribe. We have a new episode every single week. And if you've been around a long time, I hope you'll share this episode with a friend who might benefit from what I had to say today. Until next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.